Welcome to another segment of the Schuppi and ElPro MakerDAO Delegate Happy Hour. Today we're drinking water for good luck. Actually, we're drinking water right before the DAIVINITY party tonight. And I'm being joined today by a special guest, along with a special co-host who always helps out when Schuppi is on vacation. And currently he is in Norway, right? Somewhere out there?
Isn't it Denmark? I'm not so sure.
Oh, Denmark? Okay, Denmark, Norway. To Americans, is pretty much the same thing. I apologize for that. No, I'm joking. But yes, this is Jacek, Harvard University, Harvard Law School graduate. Congratulations on that, by the way, Jacek.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you for being here with us. This is the first time that I think we had a legal expert on, so it's going to be exciting to talk some legal stuff if possible. But give us an idea of your background. I know you were born in Poland. Are you from Warsaw?
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's what I say, but actually I live and I was born in a small town near Warsaw. I'm a local patriot, so I like to underline that. And yes, I've been involved in Maker for quite a while. I joined the project in 2017, like late 2017. I met with some Maker OGs at DevCon in Cancun, and I mean, this is how I joined. And I was working pre-foundation, and then we set up the foundation. I was working for the foundation as a lawyer until last year when the foundation was dissolving. I went to Harvard. Now I'm back, and it's just amazing to catch up with you guys here in Warsaw.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loving the city. It's quite. I would say that compared to other cities in Poland like Krakow and Warsaw. It's a real city. Those are tiny. Mm-hmm. They're still cities, right? But they're not. They're like kind of going to St. Louis. Have you ever been to St. Louis? No, you've never been to St. Louis. You been to St. Louis? No. You know what I'm talking about.
I know
right?
what you mean. Yes.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
So thank you for having us here at ETHWarsaw. What are you looking forward to the most out here for ETHWarsaw?
I mean, absolutely DAIVINITY. That's not expected. Like a few months ago, I would never think that DAIVINITY would come to Warsaw. So that's absolutely great. And that's tonight. So you guys, you're probably feeling out a bit of FOMO right now. That's gonna be a great party.
Do you know the location, like where it is? Have you
Yes,
been there before?
I've never been there, but I've heard good opinions about this club. So I think that's gonna be amazing.
Yeah, it's at level 27. So shout out to level 27 for allowing MakerDAO to have this party, and the events core unit doing a great job, and yeah, super excited about that. But let's get into the legal mind frame of cryptocurrency and blockchain tech. Obviously, there's been a lot of things going on, especially the latest news, which has put a lot of people on edge, so to speak. One of them being the sanctions by OFAC, which is the Treasury Department's kind of watchdog, for lack of a better word, on money laundering and things of that nature. And of course, everybody knows by now, I hope, unless you've been hiding, that OFAC sanctioned a Tornado Cash, which is a platform or a protocol, right, that allows anybody to kind of keep their privacy. They're known as mixers. So what's your thoughts there? What did you think, first of all, when you read the news or you heard about the news? What was your first reaction? And I know you did post this very, very eloquent post on the forum, on the MakerDAO Forum. So if you can kind of walk us through that, what went through your mind?
Yeah, I think that was a memorable event for sure.
Yep.
And it's quite funny because the first thing that such a thing that just crossed my mind was actually 1 or 2 months before, when OFAC listed Bitcoin Blender first. That happened a few times, but then this Blender was sanctioned, the entity behind it, and I thought, okay, so either they don't know about Tornado Cash, or they're just afraid, or they don't know how to target Tornado Cash, which is a permissionless smart contract, like actually permission with verifiably burned keys. And then 1 month later it actually happened, right? So it was already being cooked at that time. So I have some mixed feelings about the event, and of course, none of this is legal advice. I'm actually not a practicing lawyer at the moment. It's first of all, I don't think it's totally unexpected. Perhaps this specific action by OFAC is, but on the other hand, the crypto space has been, since forever, has been expecting some form of regulatory crackdown, right? This is just one form of it, just, and certainly not the last one. So I think that one takeaway for like the crypto space in general and for the maker community is just to not be completely reactive, not focus so much about like on those past events, but rather look into the future and see what other things might happen in the future to not be surprised next time. This is just about like a limited regulatory regime, sanctions, which is quite a simple thing. And now there are so many other things out there, like banking regulations, obviously securities law, crypto-specific regulations in different places, stablecoin regulations that are emerging right now. So I think that we can expect many such events in the future, and I just hope that we as a space, and especially as maker community, we're not going to be surprised and we prepare for that. And this is what my post was about, actually. It was like not triggered by the event itself, but by the reaction on Discord. There was like a lot of discussion, heated discussion about that. Many people making like rush proposals, how we should behave. And then actually my message was, hey, let's stop. And before we make any action, any like really fundamental change to the protocol, let's just consider what are the legal consequences. I mean, both advantages and some flaws. And that has been my opinion since forever, that Maker just needs to have a sophisticated legal resources to just provide this type of analysis, not to drive the project, not to be like like a tail that waves the dog, but provide this like valuable input for decision making.
But what do you think, with legal expertise, do you mean lobbying efforts or more like research efforts?
Yeah, I think that it was just before I left the foundation, like mid last year, when I like posted a brief post about like what makers should do, and I think that I included both points. So like lobbying, advocacy, public policy, this is important. But to be honest, like these days, right now, I think that it's important, but like much less crucial than a year ago. Mm-hmm. I just think that first of all, some decisions are already made, some others are in the like later stages of the process, and there are also like many more players active in the field. So I just remember 2018, 2019. There was like literally like very few people dealing with crypto regulations and crypto public policy. Not to mention DeFi. I mean, I found myself, so many times I found myself in like meetings with global regulators as the only person from crypto and DeFi, okay, just explaining things to them. And now things are different, right? There are like the policy associations, many active players in the field, and they are kind of like doing a lot of work for us, right? I mean, OFAC sanctions, I mean, there are so many players dealing with this that I'm not sure that right now with like restricted or like, some limited resources that should be makers' priority. Mm-hmm. This is important, but probably not crucial. Similarly, like stablecoin regulations, I mean, they are either adopted or like, like decision was made, like in Europe, or they are close to be adopted, like probably in the US. So I'm not sure like jumping right now if like a lot of resources makes a lot of sense. But what I still find relevant and what I wrote about a year ago is that we need like this ability to think in legal terms about the products that we have and the features that we are thinking about launching. I mean, what I wrote in my recent post was not that hey, we should centralize and comply with the stablecoin regulations, or that we should just depeg and focus on decentralization. I said no matter what we do, just let's think about legal consequences of like the course of action, just embed this legal thinking into the decision-making process.
But then how is that possible when you don't really know what regulators will do?
Yeah, I mean, this is like always true when you're trying to assess anything, right? This is like, so in some respects, this is about kind of like a risk assessment in a way, right? It doesn't mean that like all of the risk would materialize, but you can like assess the severity of risk, of a certain risk, and the probability that it would actually happen, right? So it's just needed, and I don't think that it's actually included. I mean, just as a very brief example, I mean, we have this real-world assets, kind of like huge part of Maker strategy was about real-world assets. and a lot of work was put into like the legal structuring of all of those like remote asset deals. But then I don't know if anyone was actually thinking about like regulatory consequences. If you actually start behaving as a regulated institution, like TradFi institution, with like accepting all of those deals and like lending and acting as a competitor to banks. I don't think that anyone has considered it. And you know, it's fine, probably fine if you do it like as an experiment, small scale. And that's a different story. That's like your main strategy, and if you'd like to just devote billions worth of capital into this type of enterprise. So yeah, I kind of think that this is still like an open challenge for Maker to find a good way to have this like legal strategic thinking embedded into the protocol. This is difficult, as we know. This is a challenge. I mean, for lawyers to provide advice to a DAO, right? This is like still not really. This is not really a solved problem. But that needs to happen if you want to be successful.
Got it. Yeah, I wanted to get into Mika, which you know a lot about, and obviously you definitely know a lot about what's going on with Mika. As an American, I haven't had a chance to follow it as closely as you guys have, but I did see recently that I believe South Korea is pretty much the central bank of South Korea was kind of paying homage to the Mika guidelines that have been written. They're not accepted yet, as I understand it, right? So, just getting the attention from the South Korean government after the Terra Luna debacle, that obviously means that Mika is either something that's really ready to be, taken serious, or it's something that is actually a lot of the governments around the world are going to try to adapt. So, what are your thoughts on Mika, and what do you think will happen with that?
Yeah, right. It's like Mika is a good example. If you can't really be a leader in something like in tech, you can try to be a regulatory leader.
Yeah.
Right?
Amazing, no?
Which is like I think.
Way to go!
Yes, exactly. So I think that's happening on many fronts, and Mika is kind of like an example of that. But now what is Mika? Perhaps like 2-sentence introduction. It's just like a bespoke regulatory regime for crypto, basically. So that just a completely new. We've always wondered about consequences for crypto under securities law, right? This is just crypto law or cryptocurrency law. Sorry. And some parts of Mika are really obvious, right? I mean, for example, there is not much regulation around. Sorry, guys. Not much regulation of like market manipulation, right? Against market manipulation in Europe, right? So this is kind of obvious, to have something like this in place. Another thing is like licensing regime for things like crypto exchanges or custodians. Also quite obvious, taking into account like how large this market is, and other jurisdictions are considering the same, right? There is this debate in the US right now how crypto exchanges should be regulated, whether there should be CFTC or another regime or some other agency. So some parts are really obvious, but then the question is how Mika relates to like actually novel stuff, including decentralized finance. And I'm still not 100% sure about it. I mean, as the Maker Foundation, we were like involved early on, including like since the very first proposal of the EU Commission, like the first draft of the proposal. Later on during the legislative process, we're involved talking to like the stakeholders, meeting with regulators, discussing this. But still, when the proposal was first made in 2020, it didn't like acknowledge DeFi at all. And suddenly, DeFi summer happened, and suddenly there was a proposal on the table and an open question, okay, so how does it relate to all of this new stuff, right? NFTs, DeFi, and I don't have a clear answer to that yet. So that's why the consequences for Maker are still like open. We need to see the final draft. It's agreed, but I mean, it was agreed like 1-2 months ago. It's still not public, right? This is like another weird feature of the EU legislative process. So we'll see. In terms of the world impact, because that was your question, I mean, I don't know, right? It's like GDPR is used as an example, right? That it's like this type of like standard regulatory piece that's going to be adopted elsewhere. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that it might be like a complete failure, right? The EU acted first on regulating crypto and stablecoins. This is what I didn't mention, but there's like a strong motivation to regulate stablecoins. either a complete failure or actually indeed like a template for other jurisdictions to use. But I doubt if that's gonna have like much influence on the US as far as I can tell. It seems to me that the US as like the key and other jurisdictions having like a completely separate discussion. So I don't expect MiCA to have impact on the other side of the pond, but it might have in those other countries like in Asia, for example.
Probably California. I think California seems to follow European regulators somehow because GDPR was adopted in California with like a kind of similar thing, and now after the European Union said that they're gonna ban sale of internal combustion engines in 2035, California followed doing it in 2030, right? So I think there's some like somehow there's like a how you call it, Europhilia in a way, you know, they like that.
I mean, for sure, what is happening, what I've seen emerging a few years ago, and I think that this is happening. I think that right now, they're like we are seeing like an unprecedented regulatory coordination on a global scale. Crypto is like the first such topic that like gathered regulators together. I mean, of course, they were cooperating before, especially after the financial crisis. But crypto, there is like really like a very high level of coordination. But still, I mean, I expect rather like fragmented global regime. So I think that as Maker, that's another challenge that Maker will need to find itself in like in a fragmented global stablecoin regulatory regime, for example. Even though we have like a financial stability boards, kind of like a global organization's standards, I'm sure that you're going to see different approaches, and we'll need to cope with that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about blockchains, right? They're global. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, that this is the first time we ever see something become a unison of global, I guess, big minds trying to put it together in the legal sense. But I wanted to circle back to OFAC, right? Because we're talking about how it affects other regions of the world. Do you think that the OFAC sanctions, which is, again, it's the watchdog of the U.S. Treasury, do you think that's going to spread into the EU and other regions of the world? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sanctions, I can't tell. That's likely. I mean, I'm not aware of other sanctions lists, including crypto addresses. I may be wrong, but OFAC was the first to like start with Bitcoin addresses. ETH address is now like an address of a smart contract. I'm not sure about like whether other sanctions lists are like following the suit, but it might happen. But I think that the question is more fundamental. It's about like how do you regulate permissionless smart contracts? I mean, this is the question that's out since the very beginning. The question is, well, for sanctions, right? Can you sanction a permissionless smart contract? And then the question is about, securities law. Can you actually, regulate a permissionless smart contract as an exchange? And that's just relevant for all the other pieces of regulation. And I don't think that anyone has a good answer to it.
But it has been like, I think that's kind of, at least from what I hear from Twitter and so on, it's like that was so surprising from OFAC, is that you're all of a sudden regulating a network and not entities, right? Because like even like with SWIFT, usually you talk to banks and say like, hey, don't transact with this bank, or don't. Yeah. But here suddenly you say no, the network itself cannot operate anymore, right?
Yes.
So there was a little bit of a departure from the side of regulators, right?
Yeah, and I think that this is just the the crucial part of it. How do you regulate this type of like smart contracts? How are people actually supposed to comply, and what are the consequences? Like with all of this like dusting of addresses, right? What are the actual what does compliance mean in this context, right? What are people supposed to do or not? This conversation like has focused on two parts. The first one being front ends, which I think like it's relatively easy for them to comply, and then protocol level, and especially like even like L1 Ethereum, especially after the proof of stake. And I think this is a fundamental discussion.
Yes.
I would say not necessarily because of OFAC. I mean, I'm not expecting. I mean, not knowing the details and everything, not being an expert even, but I don't expect like OFAC like suddenly sanctioning like other crypto protocols. That was like a very specific case of a protocol actually used for money laundering and with this like privacy enhancing functionality. But still, you know, I think that, as I said at the beginning, I mean, we should just expect that things like that will happen in other regulatory regimes and in other countries as well. Especially, you know, that, you know, as we all know, Tornado Cash was kind of like an exceptional in a way that it was actually permissionless. Like many other protocols that are out there, they do have like some governance frameworks or even multi-sigs, right? They do have like processes for change, so it's even more tricky for them.
And coming back to decentralization, because I think in MiCA one very interesting aspect is that fully decentralized protocols are kind of exempt from that particular legislation, right? Although I think it's still going to be decided probably in case law what fully decentralized means. But where do you see that influencing the decision making in Maker, like especially now with Endgame, like where we are probably headed? Is that you think part of the concerns there?
I think that's a good example of where we need actually a little bit more like sophisticated thinking, like real analysis, because until recently, and I believe that's the case today, as I said, there is still no final MiCA draft. And the way MiCA deals with decentralization, like decentralized protocols, is that there is like a recital, kind of like part of like a huge preamble, just like normal for EU legislation. Recital that refers to decentralized protocols, right, or decentralization. I'm not sure what's the final wording, because that's gonna be of huge impact, right? What's the final wording of this like decentralization or DeFi exemption? Kind of exemption, because they're just a recital, just like some introduction to the actual law. So we don't know yet how that's gonna play out, and then what's more, this law is gonna be now interpreted by all of the local regulators in the EU, in 27 states, and they're gonna interpret this probably quite vague recital in their own ways. Right? So I'm expecting a total mess, to be honest. Unless, you know, I mean, there are some coordination mechanisms in MiCA as well, at the EU level. But still, I just expect some jurisdictions to be completely conservative and some others just wanting to open up their doors for crypto business and decentralized protocols. So yeah, this is just a little bit complicated, right? Now, what are the consequences for Maker? I mean, I don't know, right? Because we need to know the final draft, right? And kind of like interpret it, see what is the local approach or what might be the local approach and what are the consequences for us, right? And this is how we can move forward after doing this type of analysis. And you know, this is like a function that was performed by the foundation in old days. That we did this piece, you know, we obtained legal opinions in multiple countries on the legal status of DAI, of Maker, right? And we're just taking care of it, and I just believe that something like that is necessary now as well.
Cool, let's move on to a segment we like to call speculation, which is pretty much an opinion and speculating what's going to happen. There's a big concern by the MakerDAO community about the exposure that DAI has to USDC, which is obviously a centralized token that is run by the Circle Group, right? When we talk about speculating, do you think eventually the US government would use something of that nature, that tool, for lack of a better word, to try to sanction an entity? How should MakerDAO community members, MKR owners, in your opinion, this is only your opinion, not legal advice, how should they be thinking about this?
Yeah, in the just speculation, my personal opinion. So I'm not that much afraid about, I think that there is some concern in the Maker community that there's gonna be some hostile political action, right? So that like this type of like dependence would be used as a leverage, right, by hostile regulators. I'm not necessarily thinking, based on my like experience, that would be the case. I rather think that the risk is that by making this type of like design choices and building this dependence, there is gonna emerge some regulatory dependence as well, right? So by making a certain decisions, you're gonna be just brought under like some regulatory regimes, right? So not really like a hostile, you know, regulator invading Maker, but just Maker, you know, because of like its features, finding itself under a specific regime, right, and not really having a way out. So, like for example, Maker has done a good job finding itself out of e-money regime in the EU, just because DAI wasn't e-money according to the local definition, right? If the fact that we have USDC, like the Maker has USDC as a huge part of its collateral, is going to be like a regulatory relevant factor, and I think that might be the case in many countries. We'll just find ourselves under a certain regulatory umbrella, and we'll need to, comply with or like, just, we should comply with the law and have a specific license and things like that. So, that long story short, that's my thinking, but I think that the way, based on my understanding, I think that we are still awaiting how things are gonna play out in the US specifically, right? How the stablecoin regulations, which are like we saw some bills, right? How they are shaped up and what is actually targeted by them.
Yeah, for sure.
Timeline for stablecoin regulation, do you know?
No timeline. I think there were some bills presented to Congress. I mean, again, just what I've heard, and then Congress may deal with them or not, and it's not sure that's going to happen before the elections. I think that's not very probable. But then after the elections, I think that the topic will be opened up again.
Yeah, it's a long way to go there. There's also the question of whether the SEC or CFTC is going to be the, I guess, overlord of the whatever kind of guidance and regulations are created by Congress. So there's still a lot of stuff left there, a lot of questions to be answered. But I wanted to touch on, because we spoke about USDC for a second there. The new endgame proposal calls USDC, WBTC, and other real estate components that Maker is getting into, which we like to call real world assets, as different segments like cash-like RWAs. I don't know if you saw the endgame, but there's miscellaneous RWAs, which could be something like the WBTC, which is a centralized BitGo product. If you could kind of give the Maker community a little bit of guidance on how they should be thinking about these RWAs and how to navigate the landscape of RWAs, what's some advice you would give them from your learnings of going to Harvard Law and studying American law and also European law, if possible, if you can give us some kind of what should we be thinking about?
That makes sense. So, recently, I actually read the risk team MIP, right? I think that the risk team was the first team to be onboarded, the first core unit to be onboarded by the DAO last year, at the beginning of last year. And then there is their mandate, and they make it clear that what they're gonna assess is financial risk, and they leave the assessment of technical risk to the protocol engineering. Then emerging another core unit that was emerging back then, and that's cool, right? But then it's clear that this type those two categories of risk, financial risk and technical risk, are probably enough for collateral like Ether. That was back then, the dominant collateral in Maker. Yeah. But then, for other types of collateral that is not permissionless or decentralized, you probably need more sophisticated risk assessment, depending on the asset category. And it's obvious that for those assets that are not as decentralized as if you need assessment of counterparty risk, censorship risk, which is so clear right now, but also legal risks, and it's just the way it should work. And I think that Maker fundamentally it is reliant, and it's quality of Maker as a protocol is reliant on the quality of collateral. And I think that the risk framework should acknowledge this and just be efficient and be applicable no matter of what kind of asset we have.
What kind of legal risk can you think of there? So what should they be looking at when assessing legal risk?
Yeah, I mean, the recent events I think make it obvious that for USDC that there is this censorship risk, right? That stems from many factors, including sanctions, right? So, and that's something just to take into account. it's not about like throwing, like USDC away, right, or like immediately transitioning to something else. It's just about, probably designing the system in a way that like mitigates this risk, like having some cap, right? USDC is like just difficult because it's like this special category of collateral, right? Which is not really collateral being put up by people in their vaults, but it's in PSM. It's like the status is a little bit different, right? But I think that it's, from that perspective, it's just a huge mistake to rely on any type of collateral, that you have like too much of it, and then you don't fully understand the risks, right? It's just, it was obvious that USDC is a centralized stablecoin. I mean, for a long time, DAI was driven by the kind of like an attempt to create something better than centralized stablecoins. So it's kind of like surprising that we suddenly like rediscover the risks of centralized stablecoins. And similarly, we don't want Maker to like move into something worse, like with the U.S. Treasuries, for example. I mean, I would love to see some risk assessment of that, legal risk assessment. Not only the deal of like the trust structure that would actually act as a like buyer of treasuries and will be somehow connected to Maker. That's one thing, but the regulatory risk of holding this type of asset and again allowing another asset to be dominant in Maker. We don't want to like enter into this like multi-month exercise of doing this and then discovering that there is something wrong with like the new collateral that we adopted into the system.
But to be clear, that I just want to jump in. You're saying that the risk analysis should be done by someone like Risk Core Unit, or do you think that Real World Finance should be handling that? And obviously, right now at this point in moment, September 1st, 2022, there is no pretty much Real World Finance Core Unit. But just to get that clear, you're saying Risk should be also analyzing the RWA risk?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, just to make it clear, I know that I'm offering like an armchair.
For sure.
Guidance,
yeah,
right?
no, respect,
I know that none of this is easy. I'm not like making it like. I'm not saying that everything can be like sorted out tomorrow. I know that this is like a fundamental challenge for DAO, and I don't have a good solution. And also here, I mean, I don't know. I just think that it's not really like I don't think it's like a personal failure of like. I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think it's just. We as a community, we kind of like, we onboarded these core units and we kind of like have this like structural gap that we know that the risking is only assessing financial, just decentralized collateral and financial risks. And protocol engineering or CES, the smart contract aspects. And then for real world assets, we do have a function which is like assessing the structuring of the deals with real world asset providers. But then we apparently missed some other aspects.
So you think there's like a little bit of a blind spot regarding the legal side of these?
I think so, yes. I think so. And of course, immediately if we like onboard 10 lawyers, right, to provide, a legal risk assessment, we are not going to get rid of the problem tomorrow again. This is like much more complicated, but this is how I think we found ourselves in this situation. And just as a last remark, probably that's I see the direct relation to like the DAO not having legal resources, because if I remember correctly, PSM was the first thing being developed, or one of the first projects being developed like completely outside of the foundation structure. It was actually an amazing effort when the foundation was still around, driven by the community and developed by DAO members. It's like a hugely successful design that triggered a lot of like interest in the crypto space. I think that it's like many other crypto projects or stablecoin projects are relying on this design. But apparently this type of like piece or analysis was missing, and is still missing today. And this is how we found ourselves. I mean, I don't know. Perhaps I have like a too much simplistic view. I'm not sure if like lawyers back then would help. Perhaps it was inevitable, right? But still, like as a lawyer, this is my perspective here, and I think that it could actually help to have this function there.
For sure, and I want to point out that I was at ECC in Paris, and there was a lot of panels. I mean, they did a great job of having a lot of legal panels, and I attended this panel with Layer Zero. Shout out to Layer Zero from SES, and I got a little frustrated, though, I'll be honest with you, with some of your colleagues. And when I say colleagues, I don't mean they're your colleagues, but I mean like folks that, like you, who are, love the evolution of law and how law can get a society to be regulated in a judicial way, right? To be interpreted in a correct way, and hopefully in a society that does the right thing, right? So I got frustrated with them because like no one could give us like a direct answer on how anything regarding blockchain and crypto, how it should be either regulated, or the mind behind the SEC folks and the CFTC and MiCA. So how do you navigate that as someone that perhaps one day could be working for a protocol in blockchain tech, or maybe you might work for a law firm that's advising some of these protocols and platforms? How do you navigate that? How do you try to give your future clients the answers?
Yeah, I mean, what's fundamental in like legal advice in general is that you just have your client, right? I mean, we are used to like American way of looking at this. I mean, those rules of like professional, providing professional legal advice differ across jurisdictions, but still there is like usually like a usual situation in which you have like an intimate contact between a lawyer and their client, right? So that's why lawyers find it difficult if there is no such situation, if suddenly their advice would be transparent, right, made public, if they don't know who's actually the recipient of this information, if they have to talk publicly, right, on a panel or something. This is just challenging.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that like usually just crypto projects, meaning crypto firms, they do have their legal teams and they are getting the legal advice, right? Just for the lawyers that they have on their payroll, just within their teams, right? And this is kind of obvious. This is how business works in general. What is challenging is for MakerDAO or like similar protocols, DAOs, right? To how to make it, right? How to embrace the legal function, how to make it work so that you don't get just like, for example, like here myself just talking about things, right? But it's not particularly helpful in any concrete way, right? I'm not offering like a specific solution for the DAO right now, and I think that just MakerDAO needs to sort it out in some way. One idea was that like core units would have their own counsel, which works to some extent for like their challenges. It doesn't work for like DAO-wide challenges. And I don't know, I just think that, the end game plan looks like, it's getting a lot of traction. It has to find some solution, right? Or propose some solution, like the core unit structure will be revamped, so that's an opportunity to kind of like embed the legal function in the DAO in some way. And I understand that this is happening with this legal research.
By layer 0, yeah.
Yes, legal research. I think that it's called like I'm not sure if like that's MetaDAO or like legal research like function within some MetaDAO or something.
Yeah, it's a protector MetaDAO that could do legal research on behalf of the MetaDAOs and the core, which is MakerDAO. I
just think that it's super important for this to be practical. And like this research, I think that I would like this to be like more legal than research, right? Because of course we need research as well, but we need like as a DAO we need practical solutions, and I hope that this function is gonna deliver this.
Yeah, I hope so. You yourself or Flipside Crypto, you did some research. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so in East Amsterdam I met a lawyer who just quit his traditional law firm career and like wanted to get into crypto, and I talked to him about Maker and real world assets, and he was like lighting up and was like, it's amazing. So we talked, and then I was like, hey, actually we should write a piece about DAOs and law. And then like from this very broad subject we kind of narrowed it down to legal aspects of decentralization. What does decentralization mean in various jurisdictions? What are the advantages? Like how can you see what decentralization is and what it's not? And so I think coming to Maker and the point with core units, I think one of the things that we kind of developed was the aspect that basically if you have these long-lasting relationships between, for instance, protocol engineering that does all the smart contract work then you could infer, at least that was our opinion, I would love to have your thoughts on that, that MakerDAO is in a way a product of that company, right? Because PE is a company, they do all the smart contract development, so isn't Maker then just a product? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that's so I think that I went to I came back from Harvard recently, but actually before I got there I deferred twice because of COVID and other things. So I was submitting my application to Harvard Law School in fall 2018. And the legal essay I was supposed to write, I wrote it about the legal meaning of decentralization back then. It was already clear back then that it's gonna be an important problem. And I think that, but much was written about it. I mean, still people are wondering, about the consequences, what decentralization actually means. There is, I think that for your research, what might be particularly interesting is that Angela Walsh and her concept of coders and programmers having fiduciary duties to the recipients of their code, or products based on their code. Yeah. I think it was published in 2018. She wrote that famous article in Coders We Trust. And it was very there was a heated discussion back then about that. And this is what is keeping me in this space, this type of problems. I'm just they are completely fascinating. This is just much more interesting than anything happening in any other industry as far as the legal aspects are concerned. But specifically for Maker, I think that we need to go beyond that, right? And just focus. I think that what is actually is proper legal analysis, not theoretical, but to the point for Maker, right? Because right now we do have all of those regulatory regimes, existing ones like securities law, and emerging ones, and we just need concrete consequences for Maker. Right, and I just want the legal research to be a research on this, not on the legal aspects of decentralization. And at the end of the day, these theoretical concepts are gonna be defined based on practice, right? I think that it's gonna be much more relevant for the legal aspects of decentralization what is going to happen next with OFAC and Tornado Cash, rather than what you will find in academic articles, in a way, right? Those academic articles, we are going to refer to those events and the reaction to them, and we have the opportunity to shape this reaction.
Yeah, totally. I think in the beginning we had this grand vision that basically by putting out solid legal thinking, now you are going to influence future legislation, because when you think about, at least when I think about legislation, there's this guy who has to come up with a draft for a law. He's gonna start like everybody else. He's gonna open the computer, Google, and the first couple of articles is gonna influence his thinking. So if you are these articles, if you publish those articles and they make sense, I think you have a very high chance actually of influencing.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. But at the same time, I think that there is real work to be done already now. So I'm totally for it. But I just think that we still should remember about concrete stuff, right? At hand, basically.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you about the legal scene here, or I guess I should say the lawyers that are up and coming especially in this country, which I'm very fond of, by the way, Poland. What's the scene like? Are you seeing a lot of young students who are thinking about? Are you mentoring anybody? What's the thinking as far as I was talking to Chris from L2Beat, born and raised in Poland, and he's doing some amazing thing with layer 2s and the L2Beat scene. And he's telling me there's a lot of young developers who are either going to work in Web 2 or Web 3, which is promising, right? I'm hoping one day they'll work for MakerDAO. But what's the scene like as far as students and law students looking to get into the space, and hopefully helping us, develop this?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. It's like first, I don't have much to do professional in Poland for a few years already. So I have like limited overview. Of course, I have friends and so on, but I'm not sure. It's like, this is like a conservative profession, right? And it's already reflected at the like the law school stage. So, and also like one thing is that it's just super difficult to be part of something that is global, being a lawyer, because like your profession is like bound to one country by very definition. So there are like very few examples of like people who are like working on a more global or international scale. I mean, that was my decision a long time ago, and I'm super happy about it, but it's also challenging for people to do this. And this is where the idea from, like the idea of going to Harvard came from, right? I just needed, to diversify my actual legal knowledge and, like learn more basically about things. So I'm not sure about that, but the most recent experiences with Harvard Law School, and I don't know. I mean, what I experienced is pretty much like in society in general, right? Like most people heard about things like NFTs, and they don't think. I mean, they have like mixed reactions to that.
Yeah.
You have like large majority who doesn't care. They don't know what's coming. They are not aware of like how much potential is in this space. And then you have those like hidden crypto enthusiasts, right? So I think that it's like pretty much reflects the situation everywhere. So yeah, but also these are not lawyers who are gonna like define the future, like the technology future, right? It's like lawyers are just like a supporting function, important, but I think that's much more important to have talented developers in this space. They are gonna just put out difficult questions that lawyers will have to answer.
And I think the reason why I wanted to bring that up was because I feel like getting back to OFAC, and the U.S. Treasury, maybe not just the U.S. Treasury, but perhaps the folks at OFAC don't quite comprehend blockchain technology and didn't think about the privacy that Tornado Cash, the aspect of it, right? Like the code that was written for the ability for folks, especially me as an American, to have the privacy, and I'm pretty sure people all over the world want to have privacy, right? Nobody wants to say, hey, I got this much money in this bank account, right? Like it's privacy. And so I want to get to a segment that we call Armchair Quarterback, right? And you can play along too, all right, Ralph? But assuming you were Gary Gensler of the SEC, what would you be doing right now?
Retire.
Yeah. It's like just personal opinion.
Personal opinion, for sure, yeah. Armchair Quarterback, personal opinion.
Yeah, I don't think that like what SEC is doing right now, under Gary Gensler, just being a non-American, not having a lot of context, not being even like a U.S. lawyer. I think that this is not like just because there is like some hostile approach to crypto just because they don't like it. I think that's especially taking into account Gary Gensler's background as like a professor teaching teaching a course, right? And I do have some personal experience as well. I think that this is like a sophisticated choice to be quite conservative and restrictive towards this space, and not without a reason. I mean, if you look at like many events in the space like Terra, right? I mean, you see the clear role to be played by regulators. I mean, this is literally something that they are supposed to do, right? To make sure that things like that do not happen. I'm also kind of like out of context in terms of like all of this U.S. discussions on the topic, right? But that's also why I consider myself a little bit more neutral. So what I would be doing, I mean, I'm not sure. I think that like just kind of like hard approach, kind of like makes sense to a large extent. But at the same time, it seems to me that crypto is such a new phenomenon that it does deserve like a new approach, like basically new legislation that would just solve like some specific problems. And I just think that the SEC as a regulator just doesn't have like enough and doesn't have appropriate tools to regulate something such fundamental.
Yeah.
It's like I totally get it that ICOs could be treated and are treated as like unregistered securities offerings, right? From the US point of view and how we test, it perfectly makes sense. But then treating just like permissionless smart contracts as something identical to old world TradFi structures, I feel that there is something fundamentally wrong. I mean, that just works in a different way. This is developed in a different way. It just functions in a different way. So when you hear this like slogan of same business, same risks, same rules, what I'm seeing is that even if this is like more or less the same business, the risks are different. It's not they don't exist, they're just different because you don't have like a counterparty risk, but you have some other risks like technical risks, smart contract risk. And perhaps you should have like different rules, but those rules are not the rule making necessary. I think that this is legislation, and that's the step that the EU took, right, to try to adopt a new legislation for this sector. It remains to be seen if they're going to be successful or not.
And to be fair, you know, it's a tough. Speaking of being in a chair, it's tough to be a chairman of an agency like the SEC, right? So it's not like, you know, he can make something happen overnight. You know, when I saw a lot of the videos when he was teaching at was it Yale?
MIT.
MIT, sorry. I became a big fan of him because he was a guy who finally got it, right? He understood blockchain technology. But, you know, I've been vocal about this on the Discord, on the Maker Discord, that now I'm just so disappointed, you know, because I actually was looking up to him, you know, as someone that could come in and kind of give us the guidance that I know I've been waiting for, and I think the community has been waiting for, and maybe everybody has been waiting for to some extent, right? But, yeah, here we are, and, like, I'm glad we have sort of a free society in the U.S. where you have people like Tom Emmers of Minnesota, the senator of Minnesota, who's actually going out there and trying to bat. But you know, there's still some questions there. How they're going to treat stable coins. Do you think that eventually we could see you come back to the MakerDAO community and kind of be involved more? Is that something that could possibly happen?
Yes, an unexpected question after this introduction about the US regulatory frameworks. So just the first point. I mean, I find all of the US discussions fascinating, and I think that you know, Europeans, for example, could learn a lot from the US approach. Really like practical, really looking. I think that, to be honest, I think that the most sophisticated and kind of like educated regulatory discussion about crypto is happening in the US. I mean, I'm certain about it. You know, even though like all of that stuff that you may not like about the US and people are complaining about, still I think that in terms of like the education awareness of regulators, public agencies, this is way beyond what's happening elsewhere.
I think it's pretty business friendly. Like there's this certain outlook of, hey, there's this new technology and we want to be leaders in this space, the same that we are leaders in Web 2, right? I think that outlook is just amazing. And
it's just
missing in the European Union.
And I think that, like, just to be clear, everyone has made a lot of progress over the past years. Like globally, all of the regulators and public agencies, but still the US is leading. So yeah, it's not as bad if you have such a sophistication compared to some other places. On the other hand, I think that the US could learn from other places as well. You know, so and that's something I think that's part of the challenge as well. That many Americans, also those that are engaged in this like discussions, they are not much aware of what is happening elsewhere. And and it's just worth to check out, right, and to perhaps draw some lessons in terms of like how to approach these things. Now, in terms of like my involvement, I actually, you know, I've actually acted as an advisor to SES, right, helping like Layer Zero and others to like kind of like work on legal products. My role was like purely advisory. But you know, like Maker like has a very special place in my heart, you know, and I'm still in touch with you know SES people. Yeah. So I mean, just to be like completely blunt and frank, I'm just you know, like all of the recent discussions and pivots, like in decision making, kind of like a vision for Maker, made it difficult for me to kind of like to sign up, right? To say this is like the project that I want to support. That was like true for many years. I wanted to work on a like unbiased global currency. Now I'm not sure about what is actually the actual strategy goal, and it seems like it's changing, right? Like those visions for Maker are changing. So that's my personal perspective. That could be the reason why some other people may not be engaging as well, or they are like hesitating. They're like waiting, like what would happen. on one hand with like very like mundane and concrete stuff like budgets, on the other with like this strategic thinking. Like what's actually the goal of Maker? To become like a large, real world asset driven bank? Or is the purpose to be like to have like actually decentralized currency, right? I'm not clear. I mean, that was the reason why I wasn't really sure if that's still the project I'd like to kind of work for, like fully commit.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is that Americans should be lucky that we do have folks like in Congress and also at these regulatory agencies that are trying to figure it out. And so this is great that I actually, as an American, I get to hear it from you that perhaps that's something that's missing out here in Europe, right? And that I shouldn't take it for granted that there are people who really do put in a lot of work, and I do appreciate it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to see people get scammed, right? That's the worst thing that could happen. So. And on the second hand, you're saying that perhaps we have lost some talent in the community, like yourself. Not lost them, but kind of disengaged because we haven't found the identity that we had in the past. And I could think of like right now developers that you probably remember some of them. I'm not going to name them, but super talented developers. They're still out there, working on something, but they're not around maybe because the whole MakerDAO community is just chaotic sometimes. But with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, like, I'm sure you've heard recently that DAI might actually depeg, and that could become a global currency. I mean, do you see it that way, Ralph? Like,
I don't know if depegging is necessary to become a global currency. I mean, the US dollar is kind of a global currency now, and it's obviously like it is what it is, right? So I think the depegging was more tied to
the OFAC thing.
To the OFAC thing and not being beholden to a certain exposure
to USDC,
and other real world assets, right? Yeah. So if you don't have that backstop, then you have to be able to float more. I think, I'm not sure, I think one of the delegates once proposed a free floating currency where you have like exchange rate hedging on the client side, and you kind of have these both parts that work together. So basically you have a free floating decentralized currency on the one hand, but then for you, the minute you spend it, you have this hedging that's going on. You know what I mean?
That sounds pretty complicated.
But if it works, it could be nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have no idea. I'm not a currency trader, so like.
No, for sure. Does that excite you though, that maybe possibly DAI could depeg in the future? And by the way, just to make sure everybody understands, this is something that won't happen. The media reported that it might happen like tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And in the current end game proposal, which hasn't been passed by MKR token owners, it's going to take more than likely 3 years for it to happen, if it does happen, if at all, right? But would that kind of get you kind of excited? Or did I misunderstand there when you said that was your original vision when you were with the Maker Foundation?
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure. I think that is fascinating. On the other hand, I mean, that's like the major challenge. Is there gonna be a market for something like this, right? I think that's the that's like the major question, and it's like amazing to see some people kind of like, it's like this decision was so rushly made, right? To like from the conclusion that we like the Maker has no choice but to remain pegged and just to bear with the consequences because there is no other alternative path. To actually depegging, I'm kind of like glad about the direction of which seems to be like a dominant narrative right now put out by Runa, that the depeg remains as like this ultimate goal, but it's not gonna be just pursued immediately.
Right.
I think that's perhaps given the circumstances that is like a good solution, so that we don't need to like have this ongoing discussion right now, but we kind of like give ourselves time to get there, right? Because at the end of the day, this is like Maker is like a sophisticated product, and we need to be able to make those decisions, right, and just move forward with what we decide. So I think I like the direction, but Maker was just a fantastic experience for me, also because I learned so much about how money works and everything, and I think that's everyone's experience. So there's like a huge personal benefit, and certainly for people joining right now, this benefit is out there as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't have like a fixed opinion on that, but I would love some effort in Maker put into like considering such a scenario, and actually about the designs, like you said, about what does depegging actually means. I mean, I'm not sure. And Rune has proposed this target rate, like an alternative mechanism which is based on PSM, right? And like kind of like the adjusting the exchange rate, as I understand it, adjusting the exchange rate in PSM, and adjusting the target rate of DAI that way. That's an interesting design. I'd like to see like some others putting some thought into this, right? And like operationalizing that, and yeah, thinking about what would be the, analyzing what would be the market consequences, and perhaps some analysis whether there would be a market for such a product. That would be awesome. I mean, I'm liking this type of like depth in the discussions, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a super interesting concept that Rune has kind of put into the proposal, which is turning on the DSR, which is the DAI savings rate, along with the base fee, stability fee, and somehow having a target, like you said, right, which is from the old school, the TRFM, the target rate module, but that just remains to be seen. I'm hopeful that over the next 3 years, we do scale and DAI does maintain the peg, and regulators just come together, and legal teams and folks like you, just put together great proposals for the entire ecosystem where we have prosperity, and we use this technology to build something magnificent, right? Do you envision one day maybe a region of Poland having a DAO? Or do you think did you think that's just bananas? Right. It never happened because
Poland using DAI instead of the euro.
If we take if a measure of being a DAO is like all of the political drama that we experience at Maker as well, I mean Poland is for sure a DAO already by this point, right?
We do that.
Yes, exactly. I mean that's what's taking place here all the time, like with political tribes, fighting against each other. But I think that it's a great opportunity for Maker, because look, I mean, others with like decentralized stablecoin designs are only catching up, right? With Curve and Aave launching their stablecoins. I mean, they are like at the stage that Maker was like long time ago, right? And now Maker is like facing all of those unsolved challenges, but they are so difficult because that's the first project that's actually testing the waters, right? Yeah. And I think that we should just acknowledge that if we want to change the world, I mean, we are gonna deal with difficult problems by the very definition, right? If that was easy, that wouldn't be such a challenge, and we would just live in a perfect world already. So I think we still have like some kind of like competitive timing advantage over some other projects.
I think there's so much hate going on sometimes in the forums about Maker doing this or that, and comparing to projects that are just like basically just starting out. And I think these projects will have exactly the same problems, but just in 2 years, I think.
Yeah. But of course, we should just do our work, right, and try to just move ahead. Of course, like what that exactly means, that's more difficult.
Remains to be seen. Yeah, it's up to MKR token owners like yourself, and I'm hopeful that hopefully you'll get back into the community one day and
No, I don't think I've ever left it.
That's true.
I'm active. I'm trying to monitor. I literally sometimes I wake up at like 5, 6 a.m. just to catch up with Discord.
That's
and
awesome.
I'm reading the forums, so kind of like of course, because I do have MKR stake. It is painful recently. But also because I just have like a special feeling for this project, and as you could see from my forum post, probably I'm kind of like I do care about it.
You do care,
yes. I mean, that's like Maker has been a huge part of my professional life. I just wanted to succeed. I just want the personal fame of being able to shape such a project, and I think that this is like something that we all share. So yeah, I don't think I've ever left. I'm still out there, and happy to contribute. And I still think that Maker has the best team, right? And this is this is just another thing that you guys, you're watching this, you're missing here at ETHWarsaw, because it's just amazing to see all of those maker people, like those that are active, right, like active members, and all of those like graduates of Maker that are still having special feelings like myself, and I think that's very common.
That's awesome, man. It was nice to have you here, man. MakerDAO OG, Jacek, Ralph, thanks for co-hosting with me.
Frank, awesome to talk to you. As always, Jacek, thank you.
For sure. This was a super fun episode of talking to you and getting down with some legal tough questions.
Totally else, no? Like
different vibe. Yeah, we're lucky to have Jacek and him allowing us to interview him. So thank you, Jacek.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.
My pleasure, guys.
See you on the Maker Forum.
Bye.